Hello. Today we're going to talk about this week's discussion forum topic. We're in discussion 3 this week. What we want to do first, before we turn to the page and get to the details, is review some of the important concepts and skills we've been working on. First, we know what an argument is. We know what the parts of an argument are. We know how to represent an argument in standard form. And we also know how to summarize an argument, pull out and reformulate the salient features of a position. So this week we are talking about evaluation concepts. More specifically, we're talking about how we can use the concepts validity and soundness, as well as strength and cogency, to evaluate an argument. Now, depending on what textbook you pick up, you might find that validity and soundness and strength and cogency are evaluation concepts restricted to a certain type of argument. So arguments are very often divided according to the following standards. The argument is either deductive, and so evaluated according to validity and soundness, or inductive, and so evaluated according to strength and cogency. But we could take any argument we want and evaluate that argument in terms of validity. And then if the argument is not valid, we could say, well, the question then becomes, is the argument strong or weak, right? So let's talk a little bit more about validity, invalidity, soundness, and unsoundness, because that is going to be, that sort of set of concepts will be what is the focus of one of our discussion forum choices. So recall that an argument is valid when it's impossible for the conclusion to be false if the premises are true. And the if is important here. We accept the premises as true for the sake of seeing whether or not those premises force us to accept the conclusion. More specifically, what we're talking about when we're talking about a valid argument is an argument whose form or structure is logically correct. An argument whose form or structure is what forces the premises, what forces the conclusion to be true. Okay? An argument is invalid when you can maintain true premises but show that the conclusion is false. A sound argument is valid and the premises are in fact true. So remember, a valid argument may have actually true premises and a true conclusion, in which case it's also sound. But a valid argument can be unsound. In other words, a valid argument is one that's logically correct, but maybe there is a combination of true and false premises and a true conclusion, or all false premises and a true conclusion, or all false premises and a false conclusion, right? So when you have the combination, some true, some false premises, true or false conclusion, when you have all false premises, false conclusion, or all false premises and a true conclusion, the argument is not invalidated as a result, because the actual truth or falsity of the sentences, of the statements that constitute the argument, is not what makes the argument valid. So the soundness of an argument is what we focus on when we already know that the argument is valid, and then we're looking at whether or not the premises are actually true, right? So a sound argument then, to summarize, is a valid argument and the premises are true, right? Any invalid argument is going to be, by definition, unsound, and some valid arguments are unsound. Just as a quick note, since I had mentioned the inductive evaluation concepts, strength and cogency, when we're talking about an inductive argument's conclusion being likely to be true, or that our belief that the conclusion is true is strong, right? It's a pretty firm belief, as opposed to, well, I'm not sure. Maybe it's not, I'm not utterly committed to the belief, or maybe I know from the standpoint of probability that it's not likely to be true, right? The arguments whose conclusions are less likely to be true, or the arguments whose conclusions are ones that we don't really feel confident about believing are true, those are going to be weak arguments. Strong arguments are those whose conclusions are very likely to be true, or the strong argument is the argument whose conclusion seems very, very highly probable. Or we could say that we are firmly convinced that the conclusion is true when we have a strong argument. So when you think about the distinction between a valid argument and a strong argument, you might say, okay, this argument is valid, but I don't believe the conclusion is actually true, right? So there's a sense in which validity is a concept involving a formulaic way of thinking about reasoning, whereas the concept of strength, it has more to do with what experience teaches us. Okay, so I hope that this gives you a pretty good review, or at least a summary review of what we're talking about when we're talking about a valid argument, so that when you see the prompt, you'll say, oh, okay, I see what Mia's asking me to do. So let's take a look. So here we are in our third discussion forum. What I'm asking you to do is to discuss the nature of a valid argument in terms of the possible combinations of truth values that a valid argument can have. So recall, an argument is valid when it's impossible for the conclusion to be false if the premises are true. Or another way to put it is, a valid argument is one in which the premises guarantee the conclusion. Now, this means that when you have a valid argument whose premises aren't all true, that the conclusion may be true, may be false, doesn't really matter. So the distinction here is between what's actually the case versus what has to be the case on the assumption that the premises are true. Okay, so what I propose that you do is think about proceeding by way of examples. Now, I recognize that I ask you to limit yourself to 200 words. So think about trying to be as concise as possible. But if you need to go over a little bit, that's okay. The idea is that you are honing in specifically on these various combinations of truth values, and how it is that an argument that has one of those sets of truth values can still be valid.